8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We are live with Brother Rob Robideau, missionary in Nepal, and I appreciate him taking the time to be with us. Got the internet connection sorted out. We were just talking before we went live, about as far away as you can possibly get. If you gave us air miles, Brother Rob, what are we looking at for travel to get there?
It's hard to say because you never go direct, but somewhere around 7,500 miles.
Crazy. Now, what kind of travel time would you be looking at, assuming mostly air travel, with all the different stops you'd have to do?
We always end up going through the Middle East, and we try to take a stop over there that gives us a little bit of time to rest. So it ends up being something. Okay, the first leg is 16 hours. Second leg is normally about 6 hours. So then, depending on the layover.
Yeah. Wow, crazy! Lots of fun, I'm sure, with kids and all that stuff. But Brother Rob Robideau, and just a quick disclaimer, with being where he is, and I believe this is, I'm trying to think, this is the first intercontinental Micah McCurry live that we're doing, so I appreciate that. But with the connection, if it goes out on either of our ends, I'll just fill airtime, and hopefully he's able to get it connected back up. If not, we'll finish another time, but not a problem. Brother Rob, could you give us just a quick intro to yourself in 50 to 100 words, who you are, what you're doing, what you're all about?
My name is Rob Robideau. I'm a missionary to Nepal, father, husband, got 2 sons. We've lived here since 2011, and we're enjoying serving the Lord here on the mission field.
Awesome. Fantastic. Now, you are an interesting man. I posted a little bit of your fun facts from your website, and had a little bit of fun with that. And your brother chimed in, John, I believe, and so we had a good time with that. But you have an interesting, I'm sure you have many interesting stories, and maybe we'll get into that just a little bit. But you're a missionary there. I've been there for a couple of years now, a few years now, and in Nepal. Give us geographically, whereabouts are we looking?
Well, if you're familiar with the Kathmandu Valley, we are on the south side of the Kathmandu Valley, and our altitude is just a little bit higher than Denver, the Mile High city, but we are probably in a pretty low spot compared to the mountains that surround us here.
Okay. Now, how far from some of the biggest peaks would you? I think I saw something about riding mountain bikes in the Himalayas or something like that. How far from the highest peaks would you have to go?
It's kind of funny because we are surrounded by mountains, and especially what we would call mountains in the U.S. But here, if it doesn't have snow on the top of it, it's not a mountain.
Okay.
So we've got several. They call them hills that surround us here, and they're still, big as the Smoky Mountains, that sort of thing. Right. And in fact, we had some of our winter rains. We got snow on the tops of some of those that surround us this past week. But, to the north, when we look to the north, especially after a good few days of rain, it is just outstanding. The day before yesterday, I had some amazing views, and it's amusing trying to get photos of them with a cell phone, nowadays, because it just doesn't do it justice. But we've got a panorama of beautiful mountains that surround us. And what do they say? I forget the statistics, but 8 of the 10 tallest in the world are in Nepal. And I don't know all the names and the numbers and whatnot, but I know where Mount Everest is in relation to our home. If we're up on the roof, we can look that direction. And my father claims that he saw it from our roof. Now, my father has better eyesight than I have.
Okay.
So I don't argue with him.
Sure.
But I can't say that I have ever seen Mount Everest from the Kathmandu Valley itself. And a lot of people say that it's not possible. We'll see.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, maybe he's just Superman. He just has that ability.
I think he is.
Like you said, don't argue with
I do know for a fact, though, that he has memorized the eye chart. So I don't know if he actually has good eyesight or if he just fooled the doctor into saying that he does.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of your dad, let's get into a little bit of your background. And I honestly, I don't want to treat this any differently than I would a normal interview, though you being a missionary, you're on the other side of the world, and we could get wrapped up in geography and culture and all this stuff. And I want to talk about that stuff. But what's your background? How did you end up in Nepal? Origin story, Rob Robideau, comic book number 1. Where would we go?
Wow. The story of my life is just an amazing interconnecting of crazy disparate events that seemingly did not connect, but the Lord knew exactly where he was leading. And, I grew up in a Christian home. Not that that makes me a Christian, but it means that I was exposed to good preaching, exposed to the gospel at a very young age. And I came to know Christ as my Savior at the age of 4 and got baptized soon after. And my parents tell me that even from that, when I was just a little kid, always trying to get my younger brother saved and share the gospel, preaching to him, all that sort of stuff. And trust me, he needed it, if you know him. But, from there, the Lord grew me up. And you know what happens when you're a kid, there's not much, you don't have much of a plan in life. But as I got to junior high, I felt the Lord wanted me to preach. And I took whatever opportunities I could, whether it be in school, nursing homes, bus route, rescue mission, you name it, all of it, street preaching. And I took whatever opportunities I could. And I praised the Lord for the men in our church that took me under their arm in a way and helped grow me and helped lead me into serving the Lord in that way. And then in high school, a missionary of our church came, and he was from Mexico and preached. And I felt that the Lord wanted me to go to the mission field, but I didn't know exactly where, but I surrendered to go. And so here we have kind of a progression. Obviously, it starts with salvation, starts with growing in the Lord. Then you've got, surrender to preach, and serve the Lord. Then you got surrendered to the mission field, but we don't know where. And then in my first year of Bible college, in our missions conference, I really felt the Lord working in my heart about going to Nepal. And people ask, where does Nepal come from? And I really don't have a crazy story. In fact, one time at a church I was presenting at, my wife always gives me a hard time because nobody gets my humor, my joke. But I told them that, I fell off my bed one day and I had a vision that, I was supposed to go to Nepal, and nobody laughed. They didn't get that it was a joke at all. But, I don't have a crazy story. I really don't. I started researching these places and seeing where there was a need and where the Lord could use me. And when I read about Nepal, before I had read about the mountains, I had seen it as kind of a tourist destination like a lot of people do. But when I read some of the statistics about Hinduism and Christianity, and just the numbers, even the Lord used that to work in my heart. And I kind of look back at the story of Nehemiah and his inquiry into the situation back in Jerusalem, and how he asked these questions, he inquired, and then the Lord used that information to work in his heart and give him a mission in what he did. And that's how the Lord led us to Nepal. And it's been something that's stuck. And I won't say it's been easy. It never is, getting into the ministry and serving the Lord in these ways. Sure. But the Lord led us here, and it is definitely the place where the Lord wants us and where there is a great need as well.
Awesome. I love that. And I'm not trying to make spiritual application out of everything, but you were looking, you were scouting for where God wanted you. There are some folks, and as God can work in different ways, but hits them side of the head out of the blue with something, but you were actively patrolling for exactly where God wanted you, and he just kind of led you. I love that. Now, your dad, interesting story in and of himself, and I actually, the route to having you on is I emailed your dad. Of course, he's with Lighthouse Legal, and we get to go to some of their seminars and things here in the Akron. They're in Ashtabula, I believe, Ohio.
Right.
We're I live in Akron, Ohio, and so it's not that far up there. And so I asked him if he would come on, and I wanted to talk, church legalese and things like that. And he mentioned that you had the podcast, and he said he was interested, but to have you on as well. And so it was like, you were on my radar. I think I have a list of 100 or so names, and you were on there, but I figured I'd move you up and send you an invite ASAP. And so that worked out. But your dad's story was his military career and things like that. You don't have to get too deep into that. We can cover that with him. But how much of an impression on you did that have, or what kind of molded you into a go-getter, someone that's looking for actively seeking God's will? Can you talk about that?
Wow. Well, I guess when you look back at the influences that I've had in my life, you look at my father, and, really, I think the word hero is overused, but he's definitely been an amazing role model, and, definitely someone I look up to, a person that showed me, that God is real, and, the Christian life is a real life that's not just to be lived at church, but in the home, and just he and my mother are just amazing. And yeah, I do think that his willingness to follow the Lord to the other side of the country, to take steps and be in places where, most people would not go with a family, that he already had, back to Bible college to go ahead and, or back to college to go ahead and get his law degree and follow what he believed to be the Lord's will, leading him into legal ministry. In the end, I think that these things definitely affected me as a young person, not necessarily in that he was saying, you need to do this, this is how you should do it, that sort of thing, but knowing that, my father was someone who put the Lord's will first and not, ease and, comfort for the family. But also my father being military in general, I think that a lot of the guys that come out of the military are just men of character. And I think that's something that gets kind of drilled into him. And my pastor, my pastor, Brother Gomez, he and my father, and a lot of the men that I've been surrounded by are just, I think, men of character is the word that describes it. People that are not going to be stopped by anything, that are going to do what's right, even when it's difficult, even when no one's looking.
Absolutely. Now, and you have, it would be fair to call Nepal a third world country by most. Is that a fair description?
It really is. Yes. If you look at a lot of the lists that they make of, I think the technical term nowadays is least developed country. I think that's the nice word, but no.
Sure.
I think that they end up pretty much in the bottom 5, bottom 10 every year of all the countries in the world. So it is pretty undeveloped. Yes.
Sure. So, and I've seen pictures, and obviously on your website, which is, just for people that might want to look it up, is it nepalforchrist.com? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So NEPAL for Christ.com. You can see some more information. But does everybody have a motorcycle there? Or is that like all Americans have cars? You know what I'm saying? But does that make you a rich person there? Or to relate it to people here in America?
Yes, everyone has a motorcycle here, and that's the first vehicle that everyone gets. It's kind of funny when you take your U.S. license over there, and some people you don't end up getting an international license. I have my local motorcycle license, but a lot of people, just come over with their car license and they'll show it to a police officer if they have the need to or whatever. Right. But the police officers will just assume that if you have a license, it's a motorcycle license. Okay. Because that's what everything is here in the U.S. And here, it's the opposite. You get the motorcycle license, and the extra class is for the car. In the U.S., you get the vehicle license, and the extra classes are for motorcycle and other things that you can add on here. But yes, the main vehicle that everyone uses here is a motorcycle, and that's our primary vehicle. We actually have an old Jeep. It's a 1991 Mitsubishi Pajero, but it has literally been in the shop for the last 3.5 months, and it's a nightmare trying to get parts here because and we could talk about economics of Nepal in general, but the way that this place is situated and the government, there are a number of things that make it a very unusual economy.
Okay. I had the opportunity while I was in college at Golden State Baptist College to intern at a church in Alameda, California, in basically the nice part of Oakland. And there is a large Nepalese contingent in that area. Obviously, it's the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's a melting pot. But and so the church I was at was probably 50-50 Nepalese, and then a lot of Hispanic folks, and I guess Caucasian, white, whatever, as well. But 50%, which means the lunches, the potlucks were always fantastic. My mom is a half Korean, and so I developed a taste for the Asian or Far East flair a long time ago. But incredibly nice people. I was talking to my mom earlier today, and she reminded me that they can be, to American sensibilities, somewhat abrupt, maybe very direct. Do you find that to be the case, or are they more reserved in your area, or how is that?
We actually find it to be the opposite. A lot of people will kind of say what they think you want to hear, as opposed to reality. And that's kind of, you'll go out visiting, invite people to church. Oh yeah, I'll be there. And I know you have that happen in the U.S., but I mean, it's almost like nobody will tell you no, but yet nobody will actually be there. And so it's kind of the opposite, and it does take a little getting used to.
Sure. Now, you were on deputation. How long were you on deputation preparing for the field?
I think it took us about 3 years, and
Okay.
we had a really unusual situation kind of happen in the midst of that. My wife had some very serious health issues, and really laid her up where she was in bed, and for months, and could not get out. Just some very serious things in the midst of that, and kind of threw us for a loop, to say the least. But the Lord eventually led us to Nepal. But in the midst of that, it's kind of funny with you and your project and what you're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
While my wife was laid up, staying with a family member, an aunt who is a nurse at that time, trying to help her and figure out what the problem was. We went to, I think, 16 different doctors over the course
Wow.
of those months before we ended up leaving for the field, and no one had any idea what it was. Some people said, hey, it's in your head. Other people thought it was MS. Others just, general autoimmune disease, but nobody could give us something that we could actually do anything with. And in the end, the Lord led us to the mission field because, we could be sick and, doing what we're doing here in the US or on the mission field. And my wife, she is amazing. But while we were in Nepal, the Lord led us to a doctor actually in the Chicagoland area who was able to do some tests from abroad and was able to diagnose and go ahead and work some things out. And it wasn't one specific issue. It was several different autoimmune issues having to do with, the gut, having to, a number of different things. But
Sure.
Ended up being able to get her back to where she is now, which is amazing, over the course of about 2 years of dietary changes, supplements, medication, a number of different things. But all that happened on the mission field after
Wow.
we had come here already. And again, it's just amazing how the Lord brought us together with that person and ended up first getting us to our place of service. But going back again, when she had gotten sick, I'm sitting around the house going nuts, for lack of a better term, taking care of her, making sure things are, going well, but not able to travel like I was before. And I ended up starting a podcast myself. And it was something that kind of developed. It was obviously not as spiritually minded as yours here, but I started a podcast about firearms, and we cover topics like reloading, competition, self-defense. It was called the Personal Armament Podcast. And over the course of the year to year and a half that I had done that, the Lord really grew it, and we had some amazing people on, big names in the firearm industry. And kind of like you, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people that I would not have otherwise. You got to travel to some trade shows, and in the end, ended up getting sponsorship for the show. Ended up being like $600 a week worth of sponsorship in the program, and the Lord really blessed. But of course, when you move to Nepal, and you know how it is just with this one interview, trying to line up the time zones and work out the internet connection, it just would not transfer over. Not to mention doing a firearms podcast from a country like Nepal where firearms are illegal, and it's something that makes people very uncomfortable. So it died along the way, but it was something that kind of helped carry me over, and it was a blessing to me and my family during that time.
Sure. And it's amazing how God just kind of has those things in the way, and not referring to your wife's thing as a bump in the road, but just some different things that, that did.
Call my wife a bump in the road?
Yeah, exactly. You can tell her. We'll clip that. I take the little clips out of these things, and I'll take a clip of that, and you can tell her I said that. But that's awesome how you're going a little stir crazy with some different things, and just an outlet. Sometimes you just need that to pour yourself into. So what are some of the other hobbies that you are able to, again, reading the fun facts of Robideau? It reads like a Chuck Norris novel or something like that. But what are some other hobbies that you are able to partake in? You mentioned in there reading a lot. What are some other things?
Well, I've always tried to take and see whatever situation the Lord puts me in, what are some of the things that are unique to that situation that I can enjoy and appreciate and get something out of that maybe others might not be able to, or if I was in another situation, I might not be able to. Mm-hmm. And in this situation with the health problems that my wife had, I was confined in one area, so I ended up doing a lot of shooting and reloading, and I was able to talk to others about it. Come to Nepal, and I had never ridden a mountain bike before. I won't say never in my life, but it was not something that I had done. I never had my own mountain bike that I did anything with. But when I came here, several years after we arrived, my wife got me a mountain bike. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It was a size extra large. And I was like, oh, I can fit my leg over this thing and it works. And, with our hills around here, we just have tons of trails because people walk everywhere. And so there are these walking trails, and they're actually quite technical. I mean, very narrow trails. If you look at some of the stuff on the edges of rice fields and whatnot, a lot of it's even steps up and down and different things. But I just started riding these trails, and I really enjoyed it. And I got into it, and I ended up I've ended up being able to ride in different races around Nepal in different areas, even out in the big mountains outside of the valley. But it turned into something that really was a blessing. But even more than that, there's a small village that's just about a mile or less from here. It's called Sanokokana. And it was through my mountain biking and going through this village basically on the way home every time after I go riding that the Lord laid it on our hearts to start a church in this little valley here, in this little village. And it was through riding through there and talking to people, giving out tracts, and all these different things that I was able to start having a Bible study with one of the men in that area and, some of the cattle shelters that are out there. And then eventually, use that as the place where we planted the church and started meeting. And it was through this opportunity, through this, fun thing that the Lord had given me here in Nepal, that he opened the door for us to start a church and know the people in that area. But that's how it always has been. We talked about the podcast before. And when we came to Nepal is a closed country. There are no missionary visas. It's very difficult to find a way to stay here long term. And the Lord is really blessed. But we came in here, first of all, on a tourist visa, student visa, but that doesn't work long term. And the Lord brought us very quickly onto a journalism visa and used the contacts and the previous work that I had done with the podcast to get that journalism visa, that we were able to use that journalism visa, which is much cheaper than any other type of visa here, actually, the business visas and student visas, tourist visas, all that, and keep us here for 3 years straight, which, again, it is practically unheard of being able to stay in the country that long without having to make visa runs out to, to other countries and whatnot. But the Lord has just taken each of these unusual circumstances and worked it into something that's helped us and moved us forward in ministry as well.
Sure. Is there a way, because I think we're on something here that's interesting, because so many times I feel like, and I do this too, we take the secular and we take the spiritual and we act like they are, for the Christian, they're two separate things. This is my hobby, this is my spiritual ministry, and never the twain shall meet. And a lot of it's because we come in and dressed up on Sundays and act like good Christians, and the rest of the week we live like hellions sometimes. But can you kind of lead through the talking to someone, and maybe young people that have a passion, have something that they're interested in, an outlet? Maybe it's not, maybe they realize it's not something that I'm going to do the rest of my life, but talk to them even more, rubber meets the road, on how that can be something that helps you, not hinders you later on in ministry.
It's a fair point and a very important one. I actually talked to a man I think it was 2 weeks ago. We went and met a man here, a friend of a friend, and I went down to witness to him, and he claimed to be a believer. He had a salvation testimony, and he had worked at a point, in the past with a ministry here doing basically social media work for a translation ministry or something here in Nepal, not what we would normally, associate with or anything. But then I talked to him about what he's doing now. And he says, well, I really like that, and I like the Bible, and I like, spiritual things, but we really need, more than that. We need, and you always get worried when people say more than the Bible. Right. But he says more than that, we need some practical teaching. And he said, now I'm focusing on going into these schools and giving motivational speeches about, working hard and, talking about these practical aspects of life. And, I sat there and I talked to him for a minute, and I didn't want to argue with him, whatever, but I sat there and I told him, the reality is, though, if we believe the Bible, we're going to live the Bible. Right. And what we believe should affect our lives. Otherwise, really, you don't believe it. And that's a problem with people the world over, not just young people, not just people in the U.S., but taking God's word and what we say we believe, what we've learned, and applying it in our lives. Because what you believe about something will affect what you do with it. I was talking to a young man yesterday, and most of my discipleship lessons are early in the morning. In fact, this 6 o'clock hour that I'm at 6 o'clock, you're at 7:15 in the evening.
Yes.
Is about the time when I get waxed and eloquent anyways in our discipleship lessons over here. But I was talking to this young man the other day about prayer. And I said, when you understand the power of something, when you actually believe it, you're going to treat it differently than something you don't believe. And I was talking about how a little child, if you give a little child, a piece of money, that little child, he'll maybe stick it in his mouth, maybe tear it up, do something with it. Who knows? My son, he was telling me the other day he wanted to go buy some saran wrap. And I'm just like, saran wrap? What? I don't know. They do weird things with their money, is my point. But I think that's partly because they don't understand the value of money. And I don't want to overemphasize the value of money and say money is everything. But what I am saying is that when you understand the value of money, you're not going to eat it. Right. You're not going to tear it up. You're not going to throw it in the fire. Right. And as these children get older, they end up treating it differently. They'll save their money. They'll say, oh, this money could buy me some candy at one point. Or maybe they'll say, this money can be put in towards my retirement and grow, and they'll treat the money differently. And I understand when a new Christian looks at prayer and they say, okay, give it a nod. I'll pray before I eat. I'll go ahead and, pray, for a few minutes here and there. If I have a real big problem, I understand that because they don't understand maybe yet the value of prayer. They don't understand the power of prayer. But what I don't understand is a Christian who's been in church, who has heard pastors and preachers preach about the power of prayer, and yet they still do the same thing. They still spend their 5 minutes in prayer in the morning. They still spend they only go to God when they have troubles in their lives. But when you understand the power of prayer, it's going to be something that you're going to go to, and not just for a show, but go to on a regular basis as a serious thing. It'll be the first place you turn. And I say, when you understand the power of prayer, everything will drive you to prayer. Everything. Right. I mean, you should be scrolling through the Facebook feed and, oh my, sit down. That should drive you to your knees and take you to prayer. You're talking to a friend on the phone, you should be taking that person to the Lord in prayer on the phone. You're meeting with somebody and you hear about a problem, take it to the Lord. And when you understand, the power of the scriptures, you're going to be able to apply it in so many different ways. When you see now, I do believe that application of scriptures is a spiritual discipline also. So once you start applying it and you practice applying it, it's going to be easier and easier to see those areas where maybe there was something inconsistent where it needs to be applied. Maybe there is, that verse that I read this morning applies over here as well. But again, it really comes down to believing what you're reading. And if you do believe it, you're going to apply it.
Right. I was preaching a chapel in our Christian school this morning and made the point. It was just one of those extemporaneous things that came to mind. It wasn't in my notes. We were talking about the priesthood of the believer for just a moment. And, it seemed like a lofty concept for these 4 and 5, 7 or 8 year olds and all that. And we had some teenagers, of course, in there. But I was thinking, it was convicting for me. Unlike the Catholics who believe they need to go through a priest or an intermediary, or even through Mary, of course, they have to go to confessional for repentance and all those types of things. I was thinking how sad it is that some Catholics are more faithful to go to a priest than we are when we have the ability to walk into his throne room of grace. How sad is that? We have direct access. We believe that, or so we say. We have direct access. And we use that. It's like having. I'm not being crass with it, but having the bat phone there and not using it. It's right there. It's immediately available. And there are people that will get in their car, drive to mass, sit in mass, go to confessional, and do all of that rigmarole to talk to God. And that just seems so odd to me that we don't. And again, convicting because it seems so easy, and yet we don't do it so often. And I don't know, obviously so much prayer goes into being on the mission field. It seems kind of obvious that you would need to. What are some of the biggest, obviously mentioning your wife, what are some of the biggest prayer requests, or I should say praises, answers of prayer that you've seen that it's obviously just God?
Man, just in the last few weeks, I've seen some amazing answers to prayer. And I would encourage anyone that wants to follow our ministry to get on our prayer letter mailing list. And that is on our website. Just drop in your email there. I normally send out updates every 2 weeks. And, sometimes I worry about over bombarding people. I think I've actually sent 6 so far this year. And we're at
awesome.
so that's about every 2 weeks. But, we get them out there pretty often and let people know the things that are needing prayer, but also the answers to prayer. And these last few weeks, we have been working on getting our visas for the next 5 years. And I put in an application, and without getting into the details of it, it was a very interesting conversation with a very hostile person who was making this decision. And I went away, and it kind of ended okay, but he was very anti-Christian. I mean, just from the beginning, and literally trying to prod and trying to get me to say something that would allow him to say no, essentially, in this interview. And in the end, the Lord granted those visas, and it ended up being nothing extra that I had to do. Literally, I had to wait, and that's all. But in the end, they called me and said, "Hey, come on down. Everything's approved." And about 30 minutes later, after paying the money, I walked out with the paperwork in hand. Now, there are still many steps that I have to go through, but that was just a huge thing to me. In my mind, when I left his office, that visa wasn't going to happen. I was going to have to find another way to be able to stay in the country here.
Right.
But the Lord worked that out, and I directly attributed that to the power of prayer and, keeping that before the Lord, the people that were praying for us. There is no other, nothing else that I can lay that, at the feet of, for lack of a better term. Then again, there is another, I said there's many steps, in that same vein, we have to show, $9,000 in a bank account for them to approve us for this next year, to kind of show that we have expenses. We're not going to be working in the country, that sort of thing. And I had showed that originally for the first application, but I had to take some of the money out to pay for that registration, whatever, and complicated situation, how they don't allow you to put US dollars or Nepalese rupees into a US dollar account, but they require us to show all of our money in US dollars. Anyways, it worked out. We didn't have the money in hand, and the Lord quickly worked out for us to be able to put that money in the account, the right account, and worked out the details that were frankly out of my hands and out of my control at that point. Just amazing. But there have been some situations here. There was a man this last week that made a profession of faith that we've been praying for a year and a half.
Amen.
And not in an invitation, not in even a regular service, but in a prayer meeting. Our men's prayer meeting on Friday nights, he made his profession of faith there. It was just an answer to prayer, just amazing. And again, it's such a precious thing when you understand that he's the only one in his family, the only one in his community, even, that is a believer now. And pray for his growth. Going back and looking at one of the biggest things on the mission field that I thought was just a crazy, insurmountable problem, was when my son Caleb was born. He was born here in our home in Nepal, and we went to go get his birth certificate later. And I went to the wrong office and got a birth certificate from the wrong office. They actually issued it. And the U.S. Embassy said, no, we can't use this. You have to go to the different office. Well, I took it down there and showed him, hey, we got this wrong one. We need this new one. And he thought that I was trying to basically do something underhanded.
Sure.
And he ended up, he's like, I need to have, this bribe here, $500, you pay me and I'll go ahead and get this for you, this, that, and the other. And anyways, in that situation, he ended up, hitting me and it's just crazy situation. But he got so mad, he swore that he would make sure that I never got a birth certificate for my son. And I would get stuck in Nepal, not be able to leave. He told a bunch of the local, other officials in this area, and it took about a year before we were able to get a birth certificate. And this man moved out of this position and whatever. The Lord worked it out. But in that situation where not only was this man angry and not willing to go ahead and give the birth certificate, but making sure that he actively was like out lobbying other people to make sure that I was not able to get a birth certificate for my son. And we're in the country here for a year before, with no visa for our son, just crazy situation. But the Lord worked it out in a situation where I had absolutely no control. Sure. And those are the ones where it's the most powerful, and it impacts me the most, are the situations where you are genuinely brought to the point where you realize that there is nothing you can do and then the Lord works on your behalf. Those are the ones that are the most powerful. And I could tell you stories all day long, but he does work. And I do see the power of prayer. And because of that, I put the time in. And I do talk to the Lord about the most important things, and I keep those things before the Lord.
Sure. You hear the saying, cliche, though it's true, work like it all depends on you and pray like it all depends on God. But to your point, what happens when none of it depends on you? Like, you have no say whatsoever. You just got to pray because it all depends on him. That's awesome. One
of my favorite verses is Proverbs 20:31. The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord.
Right.
And I really love that verse, because to me, and I know there's a lot of different ways you can apply it, but it's like you put in the work, but the outcome is up to the Lord. And that applies in so many areas of life. You put in the work knocking on doors, you put in the work sharing the gospel, but you don't know if that person's going to get saved. You don't know if that person is going to be added to the church. You don't know what that outcome is going to be, but you put in that work, and the Lord is the one who decides in the end. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. What does a gospel presentation, or how does, in there, America, we think knocking on doors, literature, all those different types of things, and they're all great. In Nepal, what does it look like from the time, besides the riding your bike through a town and just being seen all the time passing on tracks, what does getting the gospel to someone look like there?
Wow, the gospel is the gospel around the world. There really is. And we have tracks, we have things. I've written a couple of tracks over here, some small, some larger, different topics, different areas. But the gospel is the gospel, no matter where it is. But what we want to do is make sure that it's understood, make sure that it's clear to them. And that can be hard. It really can. And I don't want to stop anyone from getting saved. We'll give them all the information. But I've seen a lot of people over here that have made professions of faith that have fallen away, that didn't understand what they were doing. And I try to be very, very careful with this. We want to see people that, are not given a false hope, and saying, oh, good job, you're saved. And so, normally we start out with going through the gospel with them, and it takes, half an hour, depending on the questions they have. And I have never had someone who has accepted Christ at that exact moment. I have not here in Nepal. But we have, most of the time, at that point, if they're interested, we'll schedule and meet with them for about 6 weeks. And I have a set of salvation lessons that I've laid out. And it starts out talking about the Word of God. Why is God's Word important? Why is it the foundation? And it's hard to go and teach God's Word without them understanding what God's Word is. And we continue from there about what is sin, punishment for sin, what are the Bible terms that are used for, the person who is sinner, condemned, unrighteous, all these different terms. And we go through these, and we come down in the end to, the final salvation lesson, where what do they have to do? What to the end? It explains things very well. And I have some things that are, I don't know if you want to use the word contextualized. I think that's overused, but some things that apply to making sure that there's clarity when it comes to Jesus versus other gods, Jesus versus, work salvation, or, these other things that a lot of people are coming, a prosperity gospel is something we address. You're not coming to God just, so that he'll make you rich, which oftentimes you don't have to say that as a missionary, but people will still believe that, and they'll still come. And, it is, I think that the main difference really is making clear some of these areas that are especially confusing because of their culture and background and what they have seen in other churches or other Christians in the area.
What are the main, Hinduism, biggest religion in the area? Is that correct?
It is. In fact, right outside my window here, you haven't heard it yet this morning, but there's a temple. I mean, like right down outside. I can look down on the temple outside my office window here where I sit here and pray. And people come in there and they ring the bell and they sit down there and they chant and they leave their incense, and they'll bring little plates of money and seeds and food and set them out there in front of these idols. And they're everywhere. I mean, you walk 50 feet down the street in the other direction, 50 yards more like, but take 50 yards down the other direction. There's one in the corner, go right. I mean, just they're everywhere. And Hinduism is, I think they say 90%, 92%, something like that, of the population here in Nepal.
Now, so what's a big sticking point, besides obviously language barrier, just understanding in general? But what is the big sticking point, Hinduism, from someone that is interested? Where do you find the friction points between that and the gospel?
leaving other gods.
Okay.
The easy thing to do for them would be to add Jesus to their
Right.
gods. It's no problem for them to worship one God for this and one God for that and another God for this issue. And they had a health problem and somebody else told them, oh, you need to talk to this God. And, a lot of people here, they'll worship especially the idol that they live nearest to. And, you'll talk to people and be like, I've never heard of this Jesus. I know this one God here. It's right near my house. And that's the one I worship. But there are millions of gods, little g, gods that are worshiped here in Nepal. Some of them are idols. Others of them are, weather and animals and, just anything and everything. Really, it's a pantheism. And, the hardest part for them often is laying aside those other gods. And beyond that, the other difficulty is the stepping away from family that will harass them and give them trouble. I mean, there is true persecution here. Not, I don't know of people dying, in the Colosseums or anything like that, but there's true persecution as far as people that are, not given power, not given, jobs, or, not being sold food because they have become Christians. And it's a very common thing. Even in the big city here, it's easier for them in the big city because they can go somewhere else and buy food or get, their needs met elsewhere. But especially when you get out into the more rural areas, it becomes a very, basically if you get saved and your community turns against you, you almost have to move away.
Well, so what are, and I don't mean for this to become a pulpit or anything, we're having a conversation, but what are some things from you've taken the 7,500 mile, trek for the big picture, looking back towards America and a lot of folks, and just American Christianity in general. What are some things that, I'll preface it with a personal anecdote. We got to live in Germany for 4 years with my dad being in the military. And when we got back, my mom, I don't mean to tell mom, she's probably watching right now, but she got so frustrated with the way Americans drive, because on the Autobahn, it is illegal to drive in the left-hand lane unless you're passing someone. Get out of the way. So I say that, and that's just a fun, just whatever. Spiritually speaking, I don't mean to over spiritualize all, but what are some things that some brain processes that you wish American Christians could come step in your shoes for just a week and be like, oh, that might help me, might help Christians in my church be like, wow, it's a whole nother world.
Wow. And it's an interesting question. First of all, I'll say it's not driving.
Okay.
Because driving over here is just insanity. And I love being able to ride a motorcycle ever. It is fun. My wife, not so much.
Sure.
But driving in the US, it's just like driving in the US is relaxing.
Right.
Compared to here, you are just on constant alert. You get home and you're stressed out because if somebody jumps out in the road in front of you and they are constantly, whether it be dogs, people on bicycles, vegetable cart people walking across, anywhere and everywhere, it's your fault if you don't stop. And it doesn't matter if there's a crosswalk or not. But moving away from that, not that. I also want to say that the problems that one society has doesn't make it lesser than another. You look at, I think there are some things stepping out of the U.S. and being out of the U.S. for so long that we have kind of had drop away and see as things that were just a distraction and kind of pull us away from the work of the ministry and the work of the church. But yet that doesn't mean that Nepal is better. Right. Or the Nepal church. Because I do sometimes hear in missionaries, these people over here, they're so spiritual, they gave up everything. They walk 5 miles each way to church and, they pray 6 hours a day. And no, it's not that. Each culture has their own problems. And ministering here in Nepal, Nepali Christians have their own set of problems. But you're asking about the U.S. And I'm going to offer, a simple criticism. And that is the distractions that the U.S. has and the things that are often taken as important that are not. And looking back just from where we're recording this, I think it's been a week and a half ago now, that in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, we've had both the Super Bowl and the State of the Union. And just like the things that flood Facebook that get people so worked up and excited. And, both of those things are my pet peeves about, things that people get so excited about that don't really have that much of a bearing, on the cause of Christ. And don't get me started in politics and whatnot. But what gets me worked up is not necessarily the politics themselves, but how excitable Christians are about this versus the things of God. And, truly, our impact for the kingdom of Christ and the things of God is not going to be through posting on Facebook about, these different issues. It's going to be about reaching people, because when you reach people, that's what changes. I always say politics is downstream of culture and people. And when you reach people, it's going to change a nation. And when you change the nation, it's going to change the leaders. And when you change the leaders, you can have different laws. And it may take 50, 100 years. And it may not even be something that eventually happens, but we're called to reach people. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say about politics.
Sure.
The other is sports. I used to be a very big college football fan. And since I moved over here, kind of the Lord has stripped that away from me. Not really painfully or anything, just it's kind of hard to follow it. And I just lost interest in it. And I haven't watched a sports game in forever. It's just been, and I think that, now, not that I'm like more spiritual than someone else because I don't get worked up about politics or because I don't care about sports, but the Lord has kind of taken those things away from us and put us in a situation where we're separated in a way from some of those things. And it's easier to look at the U.S. now and say, wow, why are they getting so worked up about these things? Don't they have something better to do?
Sure. And this was not, it was not a leading question. You had liberty to go wherever you wanted. And I try to keep my editorials to a minimum. But this has been something that I think we're kindred spirits on this point, though. Do I enjoy sports? Absolutely, I do. But I feel like so many times it's, because one of your main outlets to see into, America is through social media, talking about people's Facebook feeds being flooded with things. One of the things that gets to me sometimes is so many of my friends and people I look up to, even, and a lot of folks that seem to have subscriptions to the Outrage of the Month Club, if you know what I'm talking about. And I could really care less who I annoy with this one, but for September of last year, it was people kneeling for the national anthem. But somehow I haven't seen a post about that recently. But it was like the thing. I mean, you would have thought that we, anyway. So we get all worked up, and now the outrage, and I don't mean to belittle it whatsoever, but outrage of the month for last month was abortion, and understand we should be outraged about it, and I don't have a problem with that. But my question is, New York passing a law doesn't mean that 50 million something kids weren't killed before that. Where were you when it was going on? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense to me. And part of me thinks,
sadly, it seems like that the outrage is being used, or people are being used in their outrage by media outlets. You can name names, whatever, people, individuals, politicians. If it suits them to get people worked up about a particular topic, that is the outrage of the month. Whatever they can use, whether it be the sports people, whatever, kneeling for the anthem or whatnot. But, and some of these issues, again, are important issues, but you need to maintain a balance in it. These things that are wrong yesterday are going to be wrong tomorrow as well. And, you don't just bounce around to whatever your favorite political commentary person tells you to, be outraged about this month.
And I feel like that requires a sense of detachment to some degree, which you are kind of forcibly put into because of just by virtue of internet connection and geography. But
that is something that my dad has taught me, and even our preacher in different ways, is really stepping back and making decisions, not just about your emotions, but about, important decisions without being in the moment at that, excuse me, I swallowed something wrong, but in that moment at the, in the emotion of the moment. And I have some guys that work with me in some of our ministries here, and they'll bring me some ideas and some things, and they'll be great ideas. And I'll say, I'll tell you what, leave this with me, and I'll pray about this. And I'll do this, and whether it be, getting 3 bids on different things, or whether it be, these different, when you make decisions, you don't want to make them in that emotion, in that moment. There ought to be some time for prayer. There ought to be some time to consider, because rarely, I mean, extremely rarely, will you ever have a decision that you cannot make tomorrow, that you cannot, and I'm not saying put off good things. If you know it's a good thing, do the right thing. But, I give an example. I really do not, I don't think most people nowadays are getting a ton of telemarketing calls. I don't know. So this is going to date me. But back when we first got married, we had someone call on the phone, and they said, hey, we got this special deal on gas. You sign up for our gas service and we can give you this discount. And, over the phone, I just said, hey, really, this sounds like a good deal. I want to do this. And like, oh, you got to do it today. You got to do it today. And I said, but I'm going to take some time. I'm going to research it and find out if this is legit. So I looked online and, I called my dad and asked him, oh yeah, these are some sorts of things. Different providers can provide gas. And so I had taken the guy's number and I called him back the next day and they said, well, sorry, but, yesterday was the cutoff deadline for this thing. And you can't, save your $10 a month on gas, whatever it was. And that's the only example in my entire life that I can think of that I had a decision to make that I said, I'm not going to make it in the moment. I'm going to consider these facts and get to it tomorrow, that I actually missed out on something in my entire life. And I know that there are some decisions that yes, right away. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about decisions that require consideration. And, I will say for most people, do not make that decision in the moment. Mm-hmm. Take a minute. It really, when your kid comes to you and wants to do something and you're not sure if it's the right thing, if you're not sure it's the right thing for your family, take a minute, think about it, ask someone else, and you'll normally come back with a much better decision.
Right. Now, what are some, and this is a question, I used to do call it a Missions Monday type thing with some of the missionaries from our church and different things. This was a question I always asked, and I think it's pertinent now, to a young person that feels either they're willing to do whatever God wants them to do, or that they have a bent towards missions. Maybe besides the obvious stuff, though the obvious can't be overstated. What would be your advice that you would pass along from someone that's feet on the ground, boots on the ground, to get them to where you are now?
Wow. I'm going to say, first of all, Brother O'Malley just did an amazing job, and I really enjoyed the interview you had with him. And he's going to be, much more practiced and versed in what he would say to young people and whatnot. So I feel like this is almost just like asking me a question after you've already gotten him on. But I will go back to the obvious stuff. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'll go back to the obvious stuff is because I don't think most people are doing the obvious stuff.
Yeah, you're right.
Before you worry about where God wants you on the mission field and whether or not you need to learn to fly and what language you're going to learn and all these other specific aspects of training that are related to the mission field, before you get to all that, you need to make sure that you have a strong prayer life. You need to make sure that you're separated and living holy. You need to make sure that you're reading your Bible every day and getting something out of it. You need to make sure that you have a testimony among the people that you're with right then of sharing the gospel. If you're not going to share the gospel in your community where you are right now, you're not going to do it on the mission field either. If you don't have the right testimony where you are right now, you're not going to do it on the mission field either. Same thing with Bible reading, same thing with prayer, same thing with giving. If you're not going to be giving right now, where you are, you shouldn't, you're not going to be giving later of yourself and your life on the mission field. And you got to come back to these basic things first. And honestly, they are overlooked. And when I look at some of these, I say candidates, some of these young people that are in Bible college nowadays, and, they have a heart for the Lord. I really do believe they want to serve the Lord, but you got to get some of these basic things down. You got to make sure that you have these things, because once you get on the mission field, you don't have the support network like you do in Bible college, being in chapel every single day. And there are certain things you can do. I mean, granted, I listen to messages every single day. I love podcasts, praise the Lord. And, I put these things in my mind to give myself the encouragement. But when you're alone on the mission field, you don't have the fellowship that you have, being in a strong church. I mean, I come from an amazing, amazing, strong church, people around me. You got to have that base. Now, beyond that, now that I've said the obvious, and I want that to be emphasized, it cannot be emphasized enough. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, you want to go, if you don't know where God wants you, specifically, if you know where God wants you specifically, you got to start working on the language. You really should. I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing. But you want to learn and study and create opportunities. Do things that will open up doors for you later, whether that be a podcast, whether that be making contacts with pastors and people and missionaries in the country that you think the Lord is calling you to, whether that be learning a specific skill, whether it be medical skills, whether it be becoming a better preacher, a teacher. But there are a number of different general things that you can do that would apply anywhere. And I would start with those basics, really, before you get specific. I know it's not exactly what you want to hear, but that's what I would say.
No, I love that. And everybody knows you want to lose weight, you eat a little bit less and you exercise more, but for some reason, if I wrote a book about it, people would buy it because it was something new. We got to try that. Though actually, if I wrote a book, they probably wouldn't anyway. But I want to kind of double back, and we're getting close to an hour. That doesn't bother me at all. But speaking of the practical stuff and just the obvious stuff, and you didn't know I was going to ask you this or anything, and it's probably not something that you would just broadcast out there. But your prayer life, practically speaking, what does that look like? If you wouldn't mind sharing hours and times for somebody, and speaking for someone that might want to be a missionary, they might not match you hour for hour right now. They're in, with my Bible college and all this stuff, but give them something to look to say, hey, he got his visa approved, he got birth certificate, God answers prayer. Practically speaking, what does it look like for you?
Well, and it's a great question, really. And we struggle with this sometimes, talking about things like prayer life, because we don't want to be, lifting ourselves up and over spiritual. Sure. And it's easier when you ask the question. It is.
Sure.
I have a book here from Brother Van Horn. I don't know if you know, he came and preached at a missions conference I was in last year, and he gave me a book about fasting. And his book on fasting, and even in person, he was talking to me about how nobody talks about fasting anymore because they think it's a secret. Now, yeah, we don't want people to see us as miserable and we're suffering and that sort of thing while we're fasting, but we do need to be passing on these things to the next generation. How do you pray? How do you fast? How do you have that right relationship with God? And we don't need to be afraid to mention it. I preface all that. That being said, my prayer life has not always been what it is now. So don't think that it's always been this way or anything. But I have a little corner in my office right here, practically speaking. I don't know if you can see my window seat over there. That is my prayer place. That is where I get on my knees and I close my eyes and I sit there, and it is its own special place of prayer. And I don't know if you want to say puts me in the mood. Maybe that's it. Maybe that sounds kind of odd, but it puts me in that place where I am free of distraction. And sometimes I'll even just take a pair of headphones. You'll even see a pair of headphones sitting down there by it that don't have a wire in them. And I'll put them over my head and over my ears just so that I don't hear other things. That being said, my sons, my wife, they know that if they open the door and they see me on my knees and, in prayer, they don't bother me. And they're good about that. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old son, and they don't bother me when I'm praying. And that's amazing. But that being said, in the morning, I wake up first, read my Bible. I listen to audio Bible while I read my Bible, and I have a specific plan. I get through Psalms and Proverbs every 30 days, get through the New Testament every 6 days, Old Testament every year. And I've got it all on my phone, so that works out nicely so I can read it and listen to it. After I finish with that comes Bible time or prayer time. And I have prayer lists that are scribbled and scratched and everything else. But I have separate prayer lists. I have a prayer list for pastor friends. I have a prayer list for missionary friends. I even have my missionary friends divided up into different categories where they are in the world, from our home church and different categories like that. And I've written beside them, pray for Matt Gansmer in his search for a new place for their church to meet. It's something he had mentioned in his last letter. And I write down these things from their prayer letters that I want to pray for. Same thing with pastor friends. We have a pastor or a church of the week of our supporting churches that we email and let them know it's Church of the Week. And they will often, not always, but email back and let us know something that I asked them to, that they want us to pray for. This last week, Brother Edwards let us know that his daughter-in-law is, going through some health issues and, praying specifically for her. And so, you've got that scratched in and added right next to that church. And, you've got all sorts of things added to us. And I've got lists. Lists are the way that you spend time in prayer without kind of wondering where you're going to go next. I have a list for myself, things that I pray for myself, for the Lord to use me in certain areas, for the Lord to develop me in certain areas. And it's as long a list as most of my other ones, list of people and their needs, but areas where I want the Lord to work in me. And I have a list of people that I'm praying for to get saved. I have a list of people that are my family members that I'm praying for, specifically my brothers and their kids and my parents and my in-laws, and praying for them in specific areas. I have a long-term health issue where your wife is on that list, and I have a list of different people in different ways that I pray for. I have a list of ministry needs, specifically in our ministry here, that we're praying for. Then to top it all off, I have a list in a small book that has my top 10. And this is what I think is just the most powerful thing I don't know if this is the most powerful thing, but I really think this has helped me a lot in prayer, is I've got all these other lists and I pray through them and I get through them every other day. I get through all of them, but I have the top 10 and that gets prayed for 3 times every day. And, in serious matters go right on that list. On the top of that list is, my visa. And there are some things on that list that I don't want mentioned because they're serious things that are, in my life, in my family's life, people that might not want it advertised or whatnot, but those things are very special things. And those go on my top 10 list that I hit in the morning. So anyways, in the morning, I get through these lists and that's my main time. It'll end up being normally about 30 minutes in the morning. Then in the daytime, again, like I mentioned, when you're on Facebook, when you're talking to someone emails you, someone asks you to pray, take it to the Lord in prayer right then. Go to the Lord. Add that to your prayer list at that point and pray for it again over the next week or however long it takes. But then in the evening, I always take another 10 to 20 minutes for prayer in the evening before I go to bed. And that's the time that I actually take that time, especially to make things right with the Lord before I go to bed. That's kind of a confession time, for lack of a better term, where I search my heart and ask the Lord to show me things during the day, sin. And I want to make that right before I go to bed, before I forget it, before it hinders my relationship and my prayer life as well. But that's kind of like the big picture. Maybe it's more than you asked for, but that's kind of what my prayer life looks like.
That's awesome. And I think a lot of times, like you said, it's this, we treat it like it's this spooky thing. Like it's something that, it's my prayer life. You have your prayer life. And a lot of times that's because I don't have a prayer life and I'm hoping no one else does either. So I don't feel so bad about it. And, it's one of those things where like, if we was a little more free, then it doesn't, and I understand it can be, it's very easy to become prideful about it. It can be, and all of that. But I hope, I know that helped me and that's why I'm talking to you, but I hope for somebody, and as I mentioned, I'll clip out some of these things and I hope that somebody will listen to that and someone will say, hey, you know what? I don't have a prayer list. And I struggle with my prayer life. So maybe that'll help me out. Maybe they'll start with one list. Maybe they, at some point they'll have, a dozen or so lists of different things and that'll help them. Now, how many years of a process has this been for you to kind of get down to something where you feel like this is my grind? This is what I do.
It's never finished. Really, sure. I'm always looking for ways. What annoys me right now is how often I end up having to reprint my prayer lists. I keep my lists in Evernote and I go ahead and I add the stuff in. And I was just talking to my wife yesterday. And if anyone listening to this, has any ideas for me, let me know. What I want is something that is synced to the cloud, cross-platform. I can have it on my phone. I can have it on a tablet. I can have it on my desktop as a web app also, because the easiest place, I'm a fast typer and I don't want to be hunting, pecking on my phone. Right. I despise trying to type things on my phone. But if I could have something, a web app where I could type in prayer requests, keep my separate lists, keep them updated on the desktop or on a Chrome app or web app of some sort, and then be able to pull that tablet out when I pray and have those lists right there up to date, as opposed to right now, it just gets scribbled on until I can't read it anymore. And it looks bad enough. And then I had to come in, put it all in and reprint it again. So, there are different things, but, honestly, the Lord is just always moving me forward in the area in new areas to pray for people, new areas to handle it. This last 2 weeks ago, the Lord really laid on my heart when I'm praying for people in these long-term health situations, specifically to reach out to them after 2 weeks, a month, and I'm not great at it. It's something I'm trying to do, but having been through something like that ourselves with my wife and her issues for multiple years, you and your family, you understand this. You get a lot of people that are excited about, what's going on, excited about praying for you, not excited about your illness, excited about praying for you and reaching out to you in the beginning. You'll get text messages, you'll get phone calls and emails and whatnot, but a couple weeks into it, it's crickets. And, I don't doubt that there are people that are still praying for you, that have you on their list, but it's nice to know. And it's nice to be able to hear from someone that says, hey, I remember you and we are praying for you. And I say that as a missionary also, not just long-term health problems and whatnot, but it is an amazing blessing to hear from someone that says, just in an answer to prayer, thanks for that. I'm praying for you. You don't understand how few people do that and what a blessing it is to be reminded that that person is praying for you. It's a big deal.
Amen.
And I think it's a bigger deal when you understand the power of prayer too. But
Right,
ahead, yeah.
right, absolutely. And so many times you see so many things, on Facebook, whatever, and it's praying, praying, praying. Comments all the way down, praying for you. Hope all is well, all that, and then for our situation, God's been so good, and so many people have done exactly that, and so that's a huge blessing. But I know for other people's circumstances, that's not always the case. They feel like 2 weeks in, they're all by themselves. And so I can, and speaking of being 7,500 miles away, you can feel like you're all by yourself sometimes. And I understand that. What are some, as we draw close to a close here, what are some final words or something you get off your chest, maybe need to, by way of the internet?
Man, get off my chest by way of the internet? Man, that's
it's always a scary thing, but go ahead.
No, I really don't think I have anything to get off my chest. Something that, in fact, last night I sat down and I prayed for the interview here this morning, and I'm excited about talking to people and hopefully give some people something that that will be a blessing and help them. That was my prayer, for this thing, not to lift myself up. I know you and my brother, they joke about, the most interesting man in the world, all these crazy stories. And I do have some amazing stories. The Lord has done some amazing things in my life. And we could talk all day about just fun stuff and flying to Alaska and, just crazy stuff. But really, when it comes down to it, I want to lift up the Lord. And I hope that people will not seek to do, as I do so that they have an interesting life, but will seek to serve the Lord and to do whatever he leads you to do. And don't get stuck on the interestingness of it either. Sure. Because most of the time, serving the Lord is not fascinating, interesting, exciting. And that ought not to be what we seek. In fact, I see that often in missions where people are trying to, are more concerned with, I know we talk about the contemporary Christian movement and,
right.
I don't know, the New Independent Baptists. I don't know if we're not allowed to talk about that on the, show, but, right. People that are going after the methods more than the message. And I see that also in missions as well. And in some ways, I see some, myself included, where I be more concerned about, the radio ministry versus actually the gospel that's being shared in it. And,
Sure.
Just get it out however you need to, whether it be in aviation ministry versus doing whatever it takes to reach people. Sure. And don't get stuck on the exciting. Don't get stuck on the method. Don't get stuck on, what seems to be interesting at the moment. Get stuck on God's will and being a servant and doing whatever needs. And if you're seeking to meet people's needs, the Lord is going to lead you into some amazing places and amazing opportunities and amazing places to serve. So just keep on seeking to serve, I guess, would be the thing I've got to get off my chest. How's that?
There you go. I love it. Now, again, because I'm the one asking the questions here, I can ask this. Where are you at as far as support you'd like to have in case someone's watching and says, hey, you know what? We have missions conferences coming up and all that stuff. You didn't ask me to ask that. We didn't talk about that. But where are you at? Or you can just say, I'm just flushed with cash. I'm the only missionary that needs no money whatsoever. Where are you at, brother?
If you need money, just give me a call. No, no, seriously, we are always embarking on new projects. And this year we have several specific goals. I just stepped out by faith yesterday, last day, and talked to a translator here. We're working out the details. We've got 2 books that we're getting translated this year. And one of them is a discipleship book that I'm really excited about. Another is a children's leading little children to God. It's a wonderful book that leads through concepts of the Bible, who God is, what God does, and just very detailed, a big book, but bigger projects this year. And it's going to cost us, several $1,000s to do the translation, let alone the printing of these things. And we're going to go ahead and expand our children's education and feeding ministry, which has been a huge blessing, allowing us to get into homes and share the gospel with a number of families in our community. And we're actually looking at trying to get 13 new supporting churches this year without going back to the U.S. That is our goal, to be able to set up a translation budget, to be able to expand the ministry with our youth. And so that's what we're praying for. But here's the thing, and that is on my top 10 list of prayer items. But the Lord has already given us 3 new supporting churches this year.
Just without January
traveling
1.
back. Yes, since January 1, the Lord has given us 3 new supporting churches.
You're on track, man. That's huge.
We are. And, so that's, if you want to see more, just check out our website. We'll tell you more about what the Lord is doing here in Nepal, what the needs are, and follow on our prayer letter mailing list. That's that. If I could get people praying for us, that would be the main thing I want.
That's awesome, man. I'm so excited, and I hope if there are, I've some of the numbers. Twitter owns Periscope as their live streaming platform, and this is being broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, all that, Twitter. And most of the pastor friends that I have watch on Twitter because I think that's their platform of choice, and it's cool to see some of the names on there. But if any of you pastor friends watch this long, please consider. He didn't mention, he said 13 supporting churches. I don't know what dollar figure, he was hoping for. Just make it $150 or $200 or something. Don't go low end. Don't go $25. Give them good support. But I appreciate, Brother Rob. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time, starting your day off. And I apologize you have to start the day off seeing me. But I greatly appreciate you taking the time. And I hope, I hope that we can do this again sometime in the future. But I'm so grateful for you giving me your time. And as I've said in the past, if the viewer count is at 0, it doesn't bother me whatsoever because I've been helped, and I appreciate it, sir.
Well, I've enjoyed it as well, Micah. Thanks for taking the time, and I hope that whoever might listen to it does find something that would be a help to them.
Amen. Well, if you stick around for just a second, I'd like to talk to you for just one more moment after we go off here, folks. Thanks so much for listening. Have some other very interesting and cool, or at least to me. If you don't find them, that's fine. Interesting, that's fine. But some other interesting interviewees coming up. I hope you'll listen to those. This was Micah McCurry Live, number 8, with Brother Robideau. We will talk to you again